Okay, so to introduce myself, my name is Suji. I'm a third-year biomedical sciences student at Ryerson, and I'm currently studying towards a master's, or in terms of career, I'm trying to be a scientist at a laboratory or in some sort of institution.
Awesome. And my name is Ruth, and I'm in my fourth year of mechanical engineering at Ryerson, and I'm the project lead for representation in robotics.
That's awesome. My name is Jenan, and I right now am working as an engineer for Enbridge. I've been working for about 5 years. I worked for a little while in implementation at Lakeside Process Controls, and I actually graduated from Ryerson as an aerospace engineering grad, specializing in avionics. And I also teach part-time to students at a little school called Zebra Robotics.
Okay. So again, thank you for joining us, Jenan. So the first question here. So you currently work at Telemetry Engineer. So could you tell us what your average day at the job looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially what telemetry is remote monitoring and all of the equipment that's needed to do that reliably. So things like radio antennas, cellular modems that allow information to be transmitted to specific places, and then the transmitters and meters that actually record and collect that information. So a day in my job right now currently looks like a lot of meetings. Planning is usually takes place in Q1. So between January and March, there's a lot of planning, a lot of meetings, a lot of documents, a lot of schedules and budgets, which is all a huge part of engineering that I feel like a lot of people in the industry don't talk about as much. They try and talk about all the cool stuff, but there is a lot of planning that goes into it. And then for the rest of the year, there is a lot of, station work or site work where you'll go out, do some installations, maintenance, inspections on a lot of the equipment that's already installed. And so what is cool about engineering is that the day-to-day on the job can look really different. Your day in January versus your day in July are completely different things. And so I don't necessarily have like a spelled out answer for it, but that's typically what I do on a day-to-day.
So are there any exciting projects that you're currently working on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so one of the cool projects that they are working on at Enbridge is renewable natural gas, which I think is pretty cool. They essentially are trying to use waste and compost to create a more sustainable source of energy. And the process is kind of complicated, but this year I was able to visit a couple of stations that are using or in the process of testing for renewable natural gas. And that was a pretty cool project. I really love when I'm able to experience or be involved in projects that have that sustainability lens and are using tech to work in either sustainability or just the environment in general. So that was a really cool project that I think I worked on this year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That sounds like some really interesting work, but I do appreciate your very real and honest answer. I can also definitely relate to wanting to do work that kind of solves some of those grander challenges in society. So it's really cool to hear that you're actually getting to do that out in the work field. So we also know that you're currently a committee member at the Ontario Society for Professional Engineers. We've heard a little bit about the project that you're doing, but can you tell us what you're working on and your thoughts on the project as a whole?
Yeah, so the way that I actually got involved in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for OSPE was through a safety clothes blog that they released. And essentially, I had volunteered with one of the committee members in the past, and we were talking about how, a lot of safety clothes in the industry are not really geared firstly to women, but then also to women who have certain dress requirements. So I wear hijab, and I found that like one of the biggest challenges for me when I first started out in engineering was finding safety clothes that not only fit me as a woman, but also fit like my religious practices in terms of the way that I like to dress and the way that I like to be perceived. And it was simple things as like how to wear my hijab under my hard hat was something that it took me a while to figure out, first of all, how do I feel comfortable representing hijab in some sort of industrial environment or industrial plant where you don't even really see a lot of women, let alone hijabi women. And then also just in terms of dress, you know, you're wearing men's clothes, and so you're kind of adjusting to the fact that the clothes don't fit you the way that you're used to. And then also trying to make sure that, you know, for me, that I was still being modest to some degree. So that was how I first initially got started, and we wrote a little blog post on it, and it was really great. The response was wonderful. And now within OSPI, we're working on this leadership series for OSPI members, which essentially is a set of recorded interviews with different experts or different subject matter experts on different topics within leadership type conversation. So for example, like negotiation is one of the topics that they're covering. And essentially it's just a short video on that on negotiation with a subject matter expert. And then they're hosting kind of like buddy sessions or group discussions the next day to discuss those videos and those topics to help, you know, young engineers or even experienced engineers get a little bit more acquainted or familiar with some of those leadership topics that people don't always necessarily talk about, like diversity in the workplace and how to build diversity in the workplace, or negotiation and how to effectively negotiate your contracts or your salaries and things like that. So there have been some really awesome initiatives that have been going on within OSPI and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee that I've been volunteering on, and I've been learning so much from them, and I'm so appreciative to be volunteering with them.
That's so great to hear. I'm so glad that that project exists. Are these videos, have they already been posted, or is that something we should look out for?
Yeah, I think that they are something you can look out for. I believe that the first set of videos is being sent out in April, sometime in April. So I think that, yeah, for sure. I think that OSPI is planning on doing the first session the first week of April, and I believe there's going to be 6 sessions or 8 sessions. So it'll be something to definitely look out for. And I believe that the videos themselves will be public. This is something that I might have to confirm. I'm not 100% sure. I think the videos themselves will be public. And then the actual buddy sessions will be for OSPI members. So if you're an OSPI member, you should definitely take advantage of it.
Both of those resources sound amazing. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay, so all these experiences you've been through, they sound great, but what would you say is your most valuable characteristic that has helped you get where you are today?
I think that my most valuable characteristic is working hard. I think that people who work with me would also agree that I am a little bit of a workaholic, and I do really enjoy being busy. But more so than that, I think working hard is something that has allowed me to excel in ways that I didn't realize. I don't think that I am the smartest person, but I work really, really hard at the things that I want to accomplish. And I think that that helps just as much as being super smart in accomplishing the goals that you set out for. As I mentioned, I do enjoy volunteering. I also work part-time teaching robotics to younger kids between grades 2 to 3. And then I also teach electronics to grades 9, 10, and 11. So I do love being busy. And I think that my bosses would definitely agree that hard work and working hard is something that I really do value. And it's one of the characteristics that I work on in myself a lot as well. If I feel like I'm getting kind of complacent or a little bit lazy, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I need a new goal or I need a new task because I'm getting kind of stagnant.
Yeah, so it's just a side note. With that, obviously comes being able to manage your time properly. And I feel like a lot of students, including myself, have that problem of just not being able to manage your time. So how do you manage your time and juggle all these different things at once?
It's going to sound so cliche, but honestly, I just schedule everything. Like, I feel like when I was in university, I had the same struggle. I was like, man, like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to do all of these things. I'm supposed to live my life and enjoy time, enjoy life, but also get all of my work done. It just doesn't seem feasible. And I think that I just realized that now I heavily, heavily rely on calendars, and I heavily rely on, making sure that I'm also doing a little bit of pre-planning, in the sense of, sometimes I think we set out for tasks and we have no idea how long they're going to take us. And we don't even have an estimate. So you might say, okay, I'm going to study for this midterm and it'll likely take me 8 hours. If you even have that estimation on how long it'll take, then you can say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do 4 hours on this day, 3 hours on this day, and then 2 hours on this day. And at least this way you have like an idea of how much time you're spending, or how much time you're planning on spending. When I was in university, I was like, okay, I'm going to study for this midterm. And then I would end up studying for like 3 days, but it wasn't like effective because I didn't know what I needed to cover and what time, or I didn't know, I don't know, like sometimes I wasn't even effectively studying because I didn't have a set amount of time. I was like, okay, I booked 3 days off to study for this midterm, so I'll just spend 3 days, but then half of it I spent watching Netflix because I had 3 days. But when you start like writing it all down and putting it into a calendar, and you say, okay, you know what, I need to do these things, but I also want to do some other stuff as well, it kind of holds you a little bit more accountable to the time you're spending. And you're like, oh man, I spent 18 hours on this one midterm, but really I watched 7 hours of Netflix, so I really only spent 12 hours. And it just helps you narrow it down a bit. So I would say get a good calendar that you like using, and just start noting things down about when you're actually spending time like that. My calendar is always scheduled, because also as you get older, you forget stuff and you'll like miss things, and you're like, damn, I had that scheduled, but I forgot to write it down. It's one of the things that just happens in this world.
Yeah, definitely. I really couldn't live without my calendar. So
Honestly.
yeah, good tip, good piece of advice there. I wish I learned it a little earlier. Great, thanks for sharing a bit about yourself and your experiences. The next couple questions are a little bit more personal.
Okay.
So we'd love to hear your reflections on your journey. As always, please feel free to pass or rework any questions too, if there's something else you would rather kind of speak on that's related. So the first question that we've got for you is, you kind of spoke on this a little bit with talking about being in an industrial environment and how that was. So we'd like to know, in your experiences so far in the STEM community, do you feel like there was a lack of diversity in any ways? And what were those ways?
So I think that there are definitely places you'll go where there will be a lack of diversity visibly. Like you will go places and feel as though there is, like you're the only one there who matches that profile, for lack of a better word. There were sites that I visited and plants that I visited that were built so long ago they didn't even have women's bathrooms. And so sometimes you'd have to go to like a separate building, or sometimes essentially, like it depends on where you are. But I went to one plant, and the guys who were working in the operating room essentially they took a liking to me, and they were like, you know what, if you need to go to the bathroom, just go into the men's, lock it from the inside, and we'll like basically stand guard and make sure that nobody goes near the washroom or whatever. Like they really tried to make me feel safe and comfortable so that I wouldn't have to walk to another building or anything like that. So those things will happen. It's a slow process, and a lot of these plants were built at a time where, just as an example, like women weren't even allowed to be engineers, or they weren't getting accepted into these programs. So those are very real things that some young female engineers will experience, especially in specific industries. However, I think that perspective is huge. So for me, there was never a time, maybe I shouldn't say never, there wasn't often a time where I felt like discouraged by it. I think if you make the best of the situation and you show the people around you that you're adaptable, they'll work just as hard to be adaptable with you. And I think that that is something that I don't necessarily say that everybody should do, because I do recognize as well that there does need to be change So they should maybe at those plants just be building women's bathrooms just for the inclusivity of it and the accessibility of it. But at the same time, I am definitely a realist in the sense of I get it and I'm willing to be adaptable if you're willing to be adaptable. So it's definitely one of those things that's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how you kind of touched on the mutual component, how, you know, like the system also plays a part in this and like the environment that we're creating and building.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that.
I do want to say that I think sometimes I'm a little bit too adaptable, and I think sometimes women in general are a bit too adaptable. And I think it's something that's important to say that I don't necessarily think that you always should be adaptable. It's something that I'm still learning through my career. And it's something that I think a lot of women are still learning through their lives of like, making sure that you are adaptable, but not making yourself uncomfortable while you're adapting to certain situations. Because I think that like I mentioned, and I'm almost at fault in it in the last thing that I just said, where it's like I'll be like, yeah, I'm okay with it because I understand how it is. And I think women are just typically like that. They're very understanding on like, okay, I get it. This building was built 200 years ago, so it is what it is, and I'll just make it work. And there are certain things where, yeah, you should be that way because it makes you easier to work with, and it makes maybe even your mentality a little bit easier. You're not getting so down about things that you can't really control or you feel like you can't control. But on the flip side, I think that adaptability sometimes is taken for granted. So you should also just be aware of what your limits are and when you should be kind of being like, oh, this, yeah, I'll use the men's bathroom and it's fine, but it kind of sucks. You guys should probably get a women's bathroom type of situation. I'm not sure if I was clear, but
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really important point. It's difficult because sometimes you never know kind of what that balance is because you do want to be included in the work environment and like by your peers and everything, but you also want to advocate for what is more inclusive and more accessible. I'm glad that it's becoming more and more common. It just makes it a little more comfortable. And that's thanks to folks like you who are doing so much work in this realm of diversity and inclusivity that we can even ask these questions and think about these things. Yeah, so I guess then, do you think that there are any sort of solutions towards how we can move to a more diverse environment within the STEM community? How can we improve the level of diversity?
I think that the conversations help, but I also do understand the like, I don't know how to put it correctly, other than like, I do understand that, sometimes when things are spoken about, then people feel sometimes people feel like they're, I don't know, being attacked, or like the interpretation is not always what you hope that it would be. And you can come at it from the lens of like, listen, this is just my experience and I'm just explaining my experience, and I'm sorry if that offends you, but this is what the experience was, and I'm not talking about it to upset anyone or make it seem like the world is swayed a specific way, or be very political. I'm not a very political person, to be honest. I'm just trying to explain so that the next person who goes into this experience is aware, because I wasn't necessarily aware. And it was this thing where I felt like I almost went into some situations kind of naive. And I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of weird. But I'm also I feel like I'm an extremely adaptable person. So even if I was like, oh, this is kind of weird, I was like, okay, it is what it is. And I think that, a lot of people have that viewpoint of like, okay, it is what it is. But if I heard someone talking about it, at least this way I'd be like, okay, you know what? I should just be prepared about these things and understand that, you know, this is what the reality of the situation is. To be honest, I feel like I went into the engineering profession and even into school not really knowing what engineering was. So there was a lot of, gaps when I was in school, and then when I started working, where I was like, oh, okay, this is something that I should have known that I didn't really know. And then thinking back and speaking to just other female engineers, they're like, yeah, that's totally something we experienced too. And I was like, Well, I wish we knew. I wish we knew that going in. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing a bit about sort of your impressions going into it, your experiences in the field. It really does help as a student who will be in the workforce soon to kind of hear how you work around or how you adapt, or but also how you voice yourself in those situations. Thanks.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, so I found the point that you made about sometimes being too adaptable can also be a disadvantage. And that's a very different perspective, because I feel that sometimes we're in these new environments, these, I guess, intimidating for some people, and we tend to just, I guess, not accept, but we tend to just see things for what they are and just be like, okay, now we just have to say yes to this because we don't know any better, right? But I feel like just because something is doesn't mean that's how it should be. So all these people have these different experiences, and I feel like even at Ryerson, we take a few steps forward, but then there's always work to be done. That's important to mention. There's always going to be work to be done, no matter how many steps we take forward. This is inevitable, right?
Mhm.
So, why is diversity and representation in the STEM field and in engineering important to you, and how do you think that reflects your experiences and stuff?
I think that it's important in every field. And I think that because they've seen so much diversity and inclusion in some of the other fields, a little bit more so, maybe, and this might be a generalization, maybe they haven't. I might be generalizing, but because they have seen it, there's a lot more success in certain areas where I feel like, you know, those things could be seen within this community a little bit more if that was pushed for a little bit harder. I think that within STEM and specifically within engineering, like I can speak specifically within engineering because that's what I've worked in. I think that there is a lot of progress that's made, but the women who are in the field are very adaptable, or even, the people of color who are in the field, they are very adaptable. So they don't push for the change as much. Until, up until recently, I think that, and this may have been a story that I've told like 1,000 times at this point, but I'm just going to tell it anyways. When I first went to go buy safety clothes, I had spoken to another female engineer on my team about it. And like, I was trying to express my frustration. I was like, you know what, like I'm trying to buy safety clothes, only men's safety clothes. I'm so frustrated about it. Like, it's just one of those things. I don't know why it just really upset me in that moment. I was like, man, like that sucks that they don't have more female safety clothes or any. At that time. And it wasn't that long ago. It was like 5 years ago. Like that's not a long time ago. So I was trying to express this to her and she didn't really get it. Like she was just so adaptable to everything that was going on that she was like, it's okay, I can just go try it on. Like how different could it be? Blah, blah. And it was just one of those things where I feel like it's also the types of personalities that are in these roles. And I think that it definitely plays, I'm not putting everybody into a category, definitely not. Like people are so different and I've met so many wonderful engineers who are so different than the others. But there are some like fundamental traits that, I think carry through a lot of people within the engineering field. And I think part of that is that they're very adaptable. They're always looking for solutions. They're not really looking at the problem. And I think that's part of being a good engineer is constantly looking at the solution. So if you're always trying to find a solution for something, and you're not really addressing the problem specifically, then even when it comes to social issues and stuff, I find that I do the same thing. I'm like, okay, like I need to just make the best of the situation. What's the point in focusing on the problem? I need to figure out how to make myself feel better in this situation, which is the solution. But maybe the solution is something bigger scale. And I think that as like scientists and engineers, you're always looking for the results. And sometimes the results are just like, maybe I can just make it easier for me, but not necessarily, okay, this is a systemic problem that maybe we need to be looking at a solution for everybody or how more people could be comfortable. But I think there's a few factors, definitely. And I'm definitely not trying to generalize or make blanket statements on anybody. But I think that that's just what I've noticed is that, you within the industry, you try and find the solutions that are best for you, because as engineers, we're kind of solution driven. So we're saying, okay, I can make it good for me for the next few years. I know how to change my perspective but maybe that's not enough.
With your journey with protective clothing or work clothing, I'm curious to know if when you wrote that blog post, you were hoping for action to drive at the problem itself, or if you were hoping to kind of address creating a more welcoming solution. And I know those sound really similar, but you've kind of differentiated between the two.
Oh, definitely. I think that in the beginning, it was intended to be this resource, like where can women get safety clothes that are for women? It became this thing where it was like, man, not very many places. And then if we do want to do some sort of like call to action, what is that going to take? And it became this thing where it was like, I don't know if we have the resources or if I have the resources to even do that. So it just became this post where it kind of became the second of what you said. It just became this guide on how to make yourself feel more comfortable within the situation and how you can like adapt your safety clothes so that they are more geared to you and your views. And so that's a whole other thing, isn't it? Like you start off with one huge goal and then you definitely take the little wins. And I think that for this, it became one of those little wins. It's something that I'm happy that is out there because there's literally no content out there about it. So I'm happy that it's out there. But at the same time, yeah, do I wish there could have been a little bit more? For sure, always. I think that it's always a little bit like that. You're like, oh man, I wish that I could have done a little bit more in this. Maybe I'll do like a TikTok, like safety clothes adaptability type thing.
Yeah, yeah.
We can inspire someone out there watching this. If you want to become TikTok famous, definitely I do not. So maybe do safety clothes for different views, you know? Safety clothes and hijab. TikTok.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think we need both. You know, we need, so that there's obviously like that want to have maybe done more, even when you're doing so much. But we need people who are problem driven and get to the sort of the root causes, but we also need people who are solution driven and want to create a space that is better. We'll go with better as
the little wins.
The little ones, yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Get some content out there, I guess. And it could be that some of these things are also so new that like figuring out the base of the problem is so challenging because it's still so new. Like you don't even really know all of the different aspects of the problem. So there's many factors for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I feel like sometimes like that's definitely great, because sometimes I feel like you don't know that a problem exists until you're in the situation, until you're actually there, right? And the fact that you're even raising awareness or just talking about it, that helps other people like yourself know that, okay, this is a reality situation. You know, there's things there can be done. There's things that can be done to improve it, but just knowing that this is a problem is half the battle, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that for people who start their career in the GTA, they're just exposed to so much diversity and they just take it for granted. Truly, like I took it for granted. Like I went to Ryerson, and Ryerson is probably one of the most diverse places I've ever been. Like even high school and like elementary school wasn't as diverse as Ryerson was. I think I met people from all over the world and I became friends with people from so many different religions, cultures. They identified as all different things and I learned so much, and it really like opened my eyes. And then I went to the workforce and I was like, it's going to be like Ryerson. And it was not like Ryerson. And it was almost this like just this, there was I had a very naive lens on diversity going into the workforce. And then even more so when I started traveling outside of the GTA for work. So I would go to like Northern Ontario and things like that. And it honestly became a thing of, how do I make myself feel the most comfortable in these situations? How do I feel like I fit in? Because I'm this person, this young girl, this young woman engineer going to a place where I don't see any people of color, none. When I say none, I mean none. And let alone Muslim people, let alone a lot of women. And so it's like, in these situations, how do you make yourself feel more comfortable so that you can do your job? Because if you're uncomfortable, you're not gonna be able to do your job effectively. And it became this thing for a couple of years where I really was just working on strategies to make myself feel the most comfortable. I was really lucky in the sense that like my management really put a lot of faith in me and they thought that I was very capable. And so they sent me to these places. That was something that I felt as well. I didn't want to be like, oh, you know, like I feel uncomfortable going here by myself because, you know, I'm a young girl and I'm Muslim and I'm, you know, a person of color and, you know, I'm not sure how they'll react to me. But I didn't want to also be like that because I wanted to keep getting these opportunities. I didn't want them to feel like, oh, you know, we should be thinking of these things when sending her places, because it wasn't their fault. They were just giving me the opportunity and I wanted that opportunity. But I also wanted to make myself feel comfortable. And I think that I also feel really lucky that, you know, I don't have an accent. Like if I talk to one of my customers on the phone, it's very hard for them to identify where I'm from. So I don't have an accent. And that is something that I think, you know, would have been a challenge in itself because people have preconceived notions. And it's just all of these little problems that you find. And, you know, whether it's unconscious bias or little microaggressions that you will find when you go to places where they don't have the same level of diversity as Ryerson. And it's something that you will definitely learn on the job. But that is to also, I do want to also say though, that people are a lot more willing to learn and to be more understanding and accommodating than I realized as well. So initially I would be so uncomfortable, but then after a few conversations and having some coffee and telling some jokes, everybody's laughing and having a good time while they're working, people are a lot more accommodating and adaptable. But then you also need to know what it is that you want to say, because sometimes you will get questions. Like I've gotten asked about my scarf probably every time I've gone anywhere. Outside of the GTA, of course. And so being prepared for those questions was something that I was not prepared for. And in the beginning, I feel like I fumbled. I was like, yeah, you know, it's a religious thing, blah, blah, blah. Like I just tried to come up with some sort of an answer on the spot. And I realized, you know what? No, like I'm going to these places and I want to use this as a moment. If someone does ask me, that I do explain it in a way that they can take something from it. So the next person that they meet who wears hijab, maybe they won't ask the same questions. And so that is something as well. Like you said, you don't really know until you're in the situation what to prepare for.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for that.
No, not at all.
Okay. So I guess I'll continue on to the next question here. So I noticed that you've done a lot of teaching and mentoring at Zebra Robotics. You taught some math and science at Rick Hansen Secondary School, and then you mentored young girls at this woman in engineering and science competition. So is teaching or mentoring something that you're passionate about, aside from your main career?
Yeah, I think that initially I wanted to be a teacher, and then I had a really great teacher who told me to be an engineer, and I did that. So, but I think that teaching was always something that I was like, man, I really want to make sure that, I don't know, I don't actually know specifically what it is about teaching, but it's just this feeling of connectivity, which I think you don't really get in engineering, to be honest. Like you interact with people and you work in a team, but you also have a lot of time that's by yourself. You just kind of work on your own stuff typically, unless you're on a huge project. But even then you'll probably do your own tasks that are just you. So there is a little bit of just individual work within engineering as much as there is teamwork. And I think that I really enjoy having that connectivity to people and making sure that I'm constantly communicating with other people. And teaching is this great way to do it because you constantly are learning. And I love learning things. I always recommend that people try and learn something new every year. Like it's something that's important. It keeps you sharp and it keeps you motivated because you're constantly learning stuff. And so when it came to teaching, I actually got into Zebra because I was doing a whole bunch of engineering competitions on like Raspberry Pi, Arduino, things like that. And I was like, man, I don't really know that much about this stuff. Like, I don't really know much about microcontrollers. I don't really know much about electronics. And I'm in engineering, specializing in like an electronics specialization. Like, that's crazy to me. But you just don't necessarily have the same exposure when you're actually hands-on building something. So I was like, you know what, I want to work in a robotics type field, and maybe I'll learn stuff. And honestly, I think that I learned just as much at Zebra in the last 5 years as I learned in my degree, because it's just so much hands-on work. You're teaching, and in order to teach something, you really have to understand it. So you spend the time to really understand it. And so I learned so much about electronics and microcontrollers and programming that I never was exposed to in university through teaching. And I think that that's one of my favorite things about teaching and mentoring. Also, I think that, like you said, if there's no representation, I'm not sure if you said this, but if there's no representation, you kind of lose, sometimes you'll lose motivation. Like, a lot of people are very motivated to be that representation, but it helps when there is other representation. It definitely helps. And so with some of the girls that I teach, even within Zebra, we've noticed that there are not a lot of little scientists running around, female scientists at Zebra, and or they are, but only till a certain grade. And it became this thing where it was like, why aren't we retaining these females in these programs? Why don't I have in grade 9 any female students? I think I have my first female student in my electronics class that I've been teaching for 2.5 years. And it's just crazy to me that we can't retain them, but having a female coach helps. And we've had parents ask, like, do you guys have female coaches? Like, what do they teach? What is their backgrounds and things like that? Because they want their daughters to be interested, and having that representation helps for sure. So I guess the answer was in 2 parts: representation, but also learning.
Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, and I mean, it's definitely sad to hear that, you know, there are some kids out there, you know, especially female girls that sometimes are scared to go in certain fields because, you know, of all the stigma and all the challenges associated with that, right? So just you know, teaching them that it's okay, that you can do what you want to do is important, right? That's why I think that there's these different education and outreach initiatives that go out to these different schools and introduce kids to STEM. I think it's personally very, very important that that happens, because sometimes these kids get inspiration from that, and they hear about all these different experiences and they're like, I want to be that. I want to be that
Yeah.
person, right? So how important do you think it is to advocate for STEM education, especially to younger kids, and specifically younger girls that are maybe pursuing or want to be an engineer themselves?
I think it's extremely important, but I also think it's important on how we teach STEM and how we explain what it is, because I think that there's this misconception, even till now, even in some of the things that we teach, that, you know, engineering is cars and like trains and conveyor belts. Like, it is, a lot of those things are in engineering, but when gearing it to different, you know, groups, I think it's important to understand that it is also different things. So for example, that sustainability lens, like figuring out a way to grow plants that is efficient and effective, and also maybe can supply some sort of energy, is engineering. And I think that in teaching engineering, we miss a lot of that stuff. A lot. Like, we look at buildings, we look at beams, we look at roads, we look at things that typically are said like, oh, that's a guy thing, and it kind of drives young girls out. And so one of the things that, like, we looked at in at Zebra was like, what are some projects that we can do with younger girls who feel like, oh, if I do this, I'm not doing girly stuff. And of course there's that mindset of like, there shouldn't be girly stuff, boy stuff, but there is, and that's just the reality of the situation. So okay, you know what, you want to wear jewelry that lights up, that's engineering, and we can show you how to do that. You want to build a purse out of Lego, go for it. You know what I mean? Like, there are other things that teach the students the same motor skills that are still a little bit more girly. And I actually spoke to a parent recently in passing, where we were talking about like some prizes. We were like ordering some prizes off Amazon. And he was saying how he wants to ensure that the packaging is very like neutral, like there's no girly packaging. Like, he doesn't want to see anything pink. And in my mind, it was such a red flag. I was like, man, like, the fact that you're saying you want to buy these STEM toys, but you don't want them to be pink, Like, I get it. Like, I don't think that things should be blue or pink or yellow or whatever. But at the same time, if you have a young girl who wants to buy this pink Lego that is showing her astronauts or, you know, astronomy, which they have, like Lego has this great like little, I don't want to say girly set, but it is like, it's intended for young girls, and the boxes are pink and purple. And if your kid wants that, like, why get them the car when you could get them the one that they like more, that's a little bit, that's pink, because they're still getting the same skills out of it. And so there's just this whole perception, I feel like, where if you have to be good at, if you want to be good at engineering, you have to be good at cars, you have to be able to take apart a toaster and put it back together. Like, not really. And I think that in teaching kids about engineering and science, that narrative needs to change a bit, because I think it's still the narrative, like, oh, you know, we knew she was going to be a great engineer because she took apart a microwave. I never took apart a microwave. I played with Barbies. Like, I like painting my nails. So like, it's this thing where I think the perception of what STEM education is and what makes a good engineer from in terms of skills as a kid needs to change, because it's right now it's still skewed, still very skewed.
Wow, I really love that. That resonated with me on a whole different level. Yeah, I think as someone who's, I really love creative things, and I love painting my nails, and I love girly things, and I love pink, and I love so many other things, and I am just like other girls. So I don't want to be told that I have to be different or have to fit into a box for me to be considered a part of a community, or to feel like I could be a part of the community. So that's lots to think about. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of female engineers have gotten like, oh my gosh, like, you look so pretty today. Like, it's a surprise. Like, I'm a girl. Like, for me, I identify as a girl. So I don't understand why my job and the way that I identify needs to be the same thing. Like, because I identify as an engineer, do I need to be like a tomboy? Like, it's just this, they need to be separated more. And I think they're still very much intertwined. And I think that is a huge part of the problem. It's a huge part of the reason that like women just don't feel as comfortable in engineering, even long term, because it's like, oh, you like, it feels like you're always picking between them. Like, I'm going to be girly today and I'm going to be an engineer this day. And and honestly, I do it too. Like, I am part of that problem as well. Like, I'll go to stations and I'll wear my site work clothes and I'm all, you know, reflective geared out. And then I'll want to go for dinner and I feel like I have to change. Like, I don't feel like I should go in those clothes even if I'm just getting coffee. I feel like I have to change into like clothes, because I'm like, oh damn, like, I'm wearing all this reflective clothes, it's so boyish. It's just like, I feel like I do need to separate them. And I think that I've met coworkers who like are coming from stations as well. They'll meet me in whatever, they'll be like super dirty, they don't care, they're like, oh, it's just clothes. And it's just, it definitely is part of the teaching that needs to happen, is like, you can wear big hoop earrings and do your job.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think noticing these things are what contributes to the learnings. All right, so we're gonna head into the last little bit of the interview, wrap things up. But I wanted to say I learned so much about adaptability and hard work and how you can integrate that into your professional lifestyle, and what I sort of learned a lot about the values of education and values of building an inclusive workplace. So I'm so glad we got to interview you, but I would love to know, as our last question, if you have any advice for students entering the field of robotics, whether that's an area you think is interesting, some lessons learned that you had, anything at all, any advice?
Yeah, I think that in terms of advice, I would just reiterate that like engineering, robotics, electronics, it's not one thing. In fact, I think the most successful people within the industry understand that it's not one thing and are looking for the gaps. They're looking for the things that people are missing out on and trying to fill that with tech. And they're trying to fill those gaps with, you know, engineering, tech, art, whatever. They recognize that they're being missed, and they're like, okay, you know what? We can work hard and figure out what those gaps are and then put a product there. And they're they're changing the game. They're changing it all, which is amazing. One of my friends sent me this article about this furniture where the inside of the furniture like grows plants. So it's just like this cool, like you can have like a little bit of a green space inside of a small space, like a condo. You don't have to have two separate things. You can have like a coffee table, and underneath the coffee table is like growing some cool plants. And so it's just really cool. And I was like, man, like that is what I want to show young girls, like this type of like, or any young engineers in general, young people, to say like, this is also engineering and this is also robotics. There's a lot of electronics that goes behind this, making sure that it's temperature controlled, making sure that, you know, what the moisture and humidity are accurately represented and being monitored. So these are all things that fall within the electronics robotics realm. It's not just one thing. You don't have to build a mechanical arm that picks up stuff. I mean, if you can, that's super cool too. And I'm not downplaying that, but it doesn't just have to be that. There's like ways that you can integrate it into any industry. And so look for those gaps and try and find where you think robotics would fit cool into there. And then also, you know, you don't also have to be one thing. You don't have to do one thing. You don't have to be one thing. I teach because I love learning, but I do engineering because I love implementation. I love seeing things that I've helped implement in real world scenarios. Choosing between the two, I can't, and that's why I haven't. It's been 5 years and I've been doing both because I can't pick one thing. I want to be a teacher and I want to keep learning, but I also want to be an engineer and see these like big projects and see what it's like, and I enjoy both. So don't feel like you have to do one thing. If you can, like you guys said, if you can plan your time and still prioritize yourself and make sure that you're getting rest and you're doing the things that you need to give yourself the energy to do those things, don't burn out, but try it all. Like you got one life and you just try what you want to try and explore it. Why not?
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really loved hearing you speak on your lessons learned and the whole interview in general. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your time with us.
Of course.
Such a pleasure to get to know you.
Honestly, if you guys need anything, let me know. I'm always happy to have conversations, even if it's offline, like not something like this. If you have questions, like you specifically, and you want just have a chat or have some coffee, I'm always happy to get to know new people.
Would love that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just you know, just talking about your experiences, it's incredibly valuable because there are people that are going to listen to this and be like, hey, if she's doing it, why can't I? Right? Because sometimes we have these preconceived stigmas and these notions about certain careers and workplaces we go into, and there's people like yourself that, you know, that have similar experiences to you, and they see, okay, wait, she's done it, so what's preventing me from doing it, right? So that's half the reason we do this. And we're doing this project just to you know, just inspire people to, you know, just pursue what they want to pursue and just not be, you know, I guess like limit themselves to what they're supposed to do.
Definitely.
Society tells them to do, you know. So that's you know, hearing your experiences is definitely valuable, and we thank you and we're grateful that you had the time to talk to us today. So thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I really appreciate being able to talk to you guys. And I think that like some of the things that people struggle with are things that other people struggle with. And so it's this thing where if you shed light on it, then you know what, it's not that much, it's not as new. If you know that someone else struggled with the same thing, you're like, you know what, it's not me, it's not on me, it's just how it is. And you can either figure out how to deal with that because you know that that's how it is. It makes you a little bit more prepared, because then you can figure out, okay, you know what, this is how it is and I want to deal with it, but at least I'm prepared, versus like, oh man, I'm going into this, I'm not prepared, and also like maybe it's me. And you will feel like that sometimes. Like you go into new situations where you're the only one, or you go into new situations where it's just really new and you're a little bit overwhelmed and you're like, man, maybe it's me. Like maybe I'm not doing something that's helping me fit in, or maybe I need to adapt in this way so I can fit in. But it's not you, it's just how it is, and you happen to be in that situation at that time. And I think that's important to note. I was watching this thing the other day where it was like people will like say things and you'll be like, oh well, you know what, they're not technically wrong. So for example, like they'll be like, oh well, how did they word it? Sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm not taking things out of context. But essentially it was like, you know what, like they treat me like I'm this like young and I can just put it in my perspective. They treat me like I'm this young hijabi girl. Like, you know, they're a little bit, they don't really know anything about me. They're not really sure what my limits are, this and that. And they'll say things where they're like, oh, I feel like that young girl like vibe, like, oh, she's just a young girl type thing. And I'm like, technically they're not wrong. And so for me, it's like, oh, well, I guess they're right. Like, I am just this young girl. But at the same time, you don't have to feel like that because they're also older men. Like they're all older men. So of course they have this conception that like, oh, she's just this young girl coming in and doing these things because they're all older men. If there were other young girls here, they wouldn't be saying that because there's more of us. So it's just this thing where sometimes it's not you, it's just a situation. And so if having conversations with mentors, and I think mentorship is so important in that way as well. If you guys, and that's something I would definitely recommend as you guys in university, find good mentors in your career. Truly, it takes you so far. It helps you so much. And I think that the reason why I am where I am is because of mentorship. Like I had an amazing teacher who told me to go into engineering. I had an amazing coworker who helped me through literally every challenge I ever faced working. He's an older white guy, but he took care of me like I was literally like his younger sister. He didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. He would fight half my battles for me. He was like the definition of an ally. He would, like, if I was having a difficult time with a customer because I'm a young girl and I just felt like they didn't respect me in the way they should, he would step in and be like, listen to her. And at the end of the day, he can tell them like, listen, the way you're being is unreasonable. You need to listen to her. She knows what she's talking about. And he recognized that like, that's his privilege, is that he can do that. He can step in and help me in those situations. And I recognized that's his privilege and I want him to help me. So I guess like even for you guys in university, I was so hesitant in university to get mentors, like to find mentors that I felt like understood me, were easy to talk to, I could confide in. And I was lucky in the way that they kind of just fell into my life. But I would definitely recommend that when you find a mentor, like you find someone who works in a field that you're interested in and you find it easy to talk to them, they will happily spend time with you. They'll happily talk to you. I think that you always feel like, oh, I don't want to burden anybody, this and that.
Yeah.
But like everybody wants to make friends. Everybody wants that human connection. Everybody wants to, know that they're helping in any way that they can. I'm saying everybody, but most people. Some people suck, right. But you know what? Most people don't suck. And so, definitely latch onto those people and keep them in your network, keep in touch, send messages, just check in, because when they see that you're actually interested in like keeping in touch and forming some sort of a relationship with them, they will do the same with you. And I'm telling you, it'll help exponentially.
That's amazing. All right. I'm excited to do that. I've always like looked at networking as something that's scary and isolating and just don't feel like comfortable networking with a whole bunch of old white men.
Neither do I.
Finding the right mentors, finding the right network, I think. That's something I'm excited to do now. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I hated networking events. I don't think I went to like 2 and I was like, this is not for me. But hopefully if they fall into your lap organically, keeping up the communication is the most important thing. And if you do, and through volunteering and stuff, you'll also meet people like that. And through the amazing things you guys are doing now, you'll meet people. But yeah, if you find someone that you think is, even in terms of industry, like you just want to, they'll have contacts. That's the other thing. Like they'll have contacts they can put you in touch with. They'll have contacts that can help you find other contacts. So that's literally the whole point of a network.